You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. Always appreciate you guys spending some time with us. Want to remind you, make sure you jump on iTunes, subscribe to the podcast so you can hear all the amazing stories that we have to tell you. Also, leave a rating and a review. That helps us out, get the word of the podcast out there. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media sites. We are on Facebook at Hazard Ground Podcast. Instagram is the same, Hazard Ground Podcast, and on Twitter at Hazard Ground. Reminder, our website is live, hazardground.com. You can get previous episodes, more pictures, bios, photos of our guests, and a lot of other great additional content that's not necessarily in every episode each week. This week's episode is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron delivers all the freshest ingredients and recipes you need in exactly the right proportions to make simple, seasonal home-cooked meals. New recipes are created each week by Blue Apron's culinary team, so you'll learn to cook with new ingredients, cuisines, and cooking techniques. Meals are between 500 and 800 calories and start at just $8.74 per serving. Shipping is always free. I'm telling you, I've used Blue Apron many times already. Their food is delicious. Every sponsor on the Hazard Ground is a product that we've used and will stand behind 100%. Otherwise, we wouldn't waste your time talking about it prior to the episode. Now, for a limited time, new customers get 5 meals free with your first 2 orders. That's 5 meals free with your first 2 orders. So get on over to hazardground.com/sponsors and click on the Blue Apron banner. Remember, support for our sponsors goes right back into the Hazard Ground, making it the best podcast it can possibly be. That's hazardground.com/sponsors. Click on the Blue Apron banner, get the discount, and discover a better way to cook. Now, on to this week's episode. And this week's guest is a former Army Green Beret medic. He is also a Pat Tillman scholar and on his way from going to a green coat in the military to a white coat as a doctor. It is Karl Holt joining the Hazard Ground Podcast. Karl, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you, Mark. It's great to be here.
Your story is unreal. We will get into what happened to you in the horrific helicopter crash that you managed to survive. And everything that you're working towards now and becoming a doctor, from a Army medic to a doctor, is, some people think it's the same thing. It's really, there's a large difference. But Special Forces medics actually have authorizations to do surgery on the battlefield, which is something that people who aren't doctors don't get to do. I'd like to get into some of that with you, but start by telling us, how did you end up in the military?
Wow. It's kind of a number of reasons and influences, I guess. Number one, watching those planes with those buildings on 9/11. That was I'll never forget it. I was sitting in a pizza shop actually in Houston, Texas, and had gone there and watching the big screen and just incredibly impacting, and then the subsequent feeling of feeling pretty useless and vulnerable, and then watching people actually sacrifice, and here I was enjoying all the comforts, and but wasn't really doing much to contribute. And so I think that was a definite big point in the decision, as well as my grandfather had served World War II, and so that was, I think, probably in a little bit in my DNA, I guess, of he had sacrificed, and his family had immigrated from Europe and seen that war was inevitable, and decided to become a pilot, and was shot down several times, and had all these crazy stories that we could never get him to talk about, but you grew up hearing about them. And so I guess in the back of my mind was, if I was ever needed, that I would need to do something kind of in that tradition.
How old were you at the time?
When I went in, I was 29.
Okay, so you had a life established already. What were you doing?
Yeah. I had I guess to kind of give you a full picture here, I had gone to seminary straight out of high school.
Oh wow.
And after a kind of a turbulent time as a teenager and violence and whatnot, I had kind of gone to the opposite extreme and become quite religious, and so wanting to kind of make an impact and and I had dabbled in business world as well. I started an MBA at one point. I had traveled extensively as a motivational speaker, as a preacher, and I had done a lot. And so it was, but I think at the root, I was still really unfulfilled and kind of unhappy in the rat race. And all of that kind of helped tunneled me to make that decision to join.
So when you sign up, you become a Green Beret, but when you sign up, did you know that's what you wanted to do, or how did you come across the information? Did you stumble on it? Tell us that.
Yeah. I knew I wanted to do something, and so I went to this Barnes and Noble that was not too far from where I lived in Texas, and so I started reading books, and I looked into PJs, in the Air Force. Yep. I looked into SEALs, and I looked into doing some agency work or CIA or something. I knew I wanted to do something, and kept coming back to this whole Special Forces thing, and wanting to do something that I felt was meaningful, challenging, adventurous, and the aspect of being a Green Beret. I mean, I studied it, and I knew pretty much exactly what I wanted to do.
Did you know how tough it was?
I had a concept, but yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody really knows how tough it is until they're in that moment and they've gone a few days without sleep, and
So when you went to a recruiter to tell them you wanted to be a Green Beret, did they look at you at 29 years old and go, this probably isn't the easiest path you're taking?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, I had a couple that tried to funnel me into other jobs, and the Air Force flat out turned me down, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, I'm just outright. I had kids, and so they said basically you just need to go find something else to do with your life.
Wow.
And the Army was all for it.
We're waiting with open arms, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't even matter if you can support your family. We'll take you.
So you enlist, you raise your right hand. This is how far after 9/11 that it happens?
At this point, this is 4 years.
Oh, really? It took that long?
Yeah. So, and kind of the backstory was that I went in twice, actually. I went in 2004, right at 3 years later. It wasn't the right time. There was a lot of family drama, and so with a month and a half in, we had some other family issues come up, and so I got out to take care of those things, and then basically right at 2 years later came back.
Okay. And so the Army was, going to work with you and obviously let you go tend to the family stuff. And then, but did you have to sign a new contract, or it was just kind of like a break in service, so to speak? Yeah,
no, I had to sign a completely new they completely let me out.
Oh, wow.
I had to sign a complete new contract. And incidentally, they wouldn't let me have what they called an 18 X-ray contract at that time, which is basically guys going in from off the street, going directly into to try to be selected as a Green Beret.
Yeah, because typically they'll send you to the infantry or somewhere else first, and then you got to go through all the extra training, Ranger School, and whatnot, and then Special Forces assessment and selection, and all. Right. So you had a contract initially just to go right to assessment and selection and go be a Green Beret, but then you had to kind of go the circuitous route.
Right. So when I went in the second time, they wouldn't let me do that, and I understood why. But it wasn't only, I think, about 5-6 weeks into basic training in there at Benning that I got a contract once I was in. So and I knew that I could do it. I knew what I had to do, but just kind of had to prove myself a little bit. And
you're not the only guy who enlisted at a later stage in their life. What I mean is basically not an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid
right.
who, or anybody after 9/11 who just said, yeah, I'll go do this. You're 29 years old, you're established. We always ask, because I'm very, very curious, what's it like going through basic training as a grown adult with 18-year-old kids?
You know, I think it's knowing that it's a game and not thinking too harshly about your colleagues, which at times, you know, you're just at a different point of life, you know, and I mean, shoot, I had probably been in 25 other countries and had a career, you know, so being an enlisted guy and pretty much everyone around me is you know, 18 to 20, and you know, you just kind of have to understand, hey, when I was at that age, I wasn't all that mature either, and suck it up, play the game, and you know, go on to the next thing.
Well, the next thing for you, once you get in and you go through basic and AIT, where do you go next, and what's your path here to get into Special Forces?
Yeah, so I went to jump school there at Benning Airborne School, and from there there's a kind of a pre-selection course that they put you through, about a month long, probably in some ways more intense than selection was. And so after passing that, and then I went to you know, Special Forces Assessment and Selection.
So there was no Ranger School for you in the whole deal yet?
No.
Okay.
I went straight all the way through, just school after school, and then went to selection. And I had been, I mean, kind of to back up, I had grown up in Alaska, grown up in the cold. Then I had been in Houston for like 12 years, 13 years, and kind of got used to the heat. And I think on our PT test day of starting selection, it started snowing, and I wasn't ready for that. I had grown really comfortable, and so that was a lot of fun. And yeah, but past selection, and I'll be honest with you, it was looking back, it was a huge risk, but from the standpoint of having a life and having a family, and going in, I don't think I would have ever done well outside of the SF life. I think it was just kind of a natural fit, but you know, you don't know if you're going to make it.
Yeah.
And the pucker factor was certainly real. The risk of coming in, and if I hadn't made it, I would have been sent to basically needs of the Army.
Yeah.
And who knows where I would have, you know, that was the huge risk for it.
And for those listening who aren't military, even some military members who don't know, you know, just going to assessment and selection doesn't mean you get your Green Beret. That is just the course that they send you to get the chance to go get your Green Beret. So, right. you know, you complete the Special Forces assessment and selection, and that is okay, you are fit enough to go and try to be a Green Beret, which comes next once that happens. Tell us about that experience. Yeah,
so started the process, and what we call the qualification course, or the Q course, and generally it's about a year long if you go straight through, but for medics it's about 2 years roughly. Now,
before you go on, I just want to interrupt. I'm sorry, but did you know you wanted to be a Special Forces medic, or was it Special Forces and then they told you were going to be a medic?
Yeah, that was exactly what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I had
Why?
Researched, read a lot. I think that was actually probably another reason that I went in to begin with. You know, wanting to do something big and meaningful, but also wanting to do something medical. I had a friend who was a police officer there in Houston, and he'd gotten shot in the stomach and had by an AK-47, and had gone through a really, really long process of recovery. And I had seen a trauma surgeon that saved him, and who happened to be an Army surgeon doing a fellowship there in Houston. And so that's kind of where this whole medical thing started. And I just became fascinated with every aspect of medicine, and started reading books and asking questions, and interested in the whole path of his recovery, and watching the competency of the doctors and staff. And so when it came time to kind of transition my life, and after 9/11, it kind of just all culminated in this one thing, of being an 18 Delta Green Beret medic. Not only was the aspect of, contributing, being in the fight, being on the front lines, and, being out there, but also being a healer and kind of learning the art of medicine as well, appealed to me on a lot of levels.
So you get through assessment selection. Take us through the Q course. This is a 2-year process. Now, when do you start it? Like, what year are we, and where are you in your life and everything else?
Oh, wow. So I went to selection in 2006, November timeframe. And so it basically went right in, I think, the next month. So this is end of 2006, early 2007.
All right. So you start the Q course, and as you mentioned, the Medic Q course is a heck of a lot tougher. Now, I have to ask you, because I do know one Green Beret who told me this, and I'm not sure if it was a medic or not, but one of the tasks that I heard that they make you do is, like, they take an animal that's going to be euthanized anyway, and your job is to keep the animal alive for like 24, 36 hours, whatever it is. So, for example, they'll break its leg, and then they'll shoot it, and then they'll cut it and everything else, and you have to keep this animal alive. Is that part of your training?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of the kind of culminating exercise to the medic portion of the course. Yeah.
That's so. What animal was it for you?
So it was a caprine, a goat, that we had, and I want to say it was in the neighborhood of 72 to 96 hours that he'd been shot, and so we're having to perform surgery and debridement, and you're having to, to run all your own labs and, culture the wounds and make sure you're giving the right antibiotic, and wound management and pain management and all these things. And you kind of get close to your little buddy there, and because you live with them, you're taking care of them, 24 hours a day. And so it's just kind of a time of very little sleep where everything's on the line. You got to pass, you got to make it, and he's kind of got to pull through for you. I mean, your future depends on it. So,
and just so we're clear, the culminating exercise, if you fail that, you wasted 2 years, right?
Basically, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Good job, buddy. Come back another day.
That's just crazy. I know it may sound to the average person who's not military, it may sound a little bit mean and mistreatment of animals. And forget all that for a minute. Just understand what the premise here is that, one, in combat, a lot of the reason people die, it's not necessarily from the gunshot itself. It's from the inability to stop the bleeding in a proper amount of time. That's the number one loss of life on the battlefield, is failure to stop the bleeding. And so, in the practice, and I'm just trying to give some of our non-military listeners the background, in the practice of doing this, it's that's how you save a life on the battlefield, because you don't know when that chopper is going to be able to come and get him out. It might be 2 hours, it might be 12 hours, it might be 24, but in your line of work, you can't think, well, the chopper will be here, so all I got to do is for 12 hours. No, you're thinking, I'm going to do this until whenever the time dictates.
That's right.
Unreal. Yep. So give me some more about, going through the training as a medic, because it's not just all medical stuff, is it?
No. So yeah, we do everything that everybody else does. And, we're just another guy on the team. So, the training is kind of designed, you go through a large portion of it before you ever start the medical training. And obviously this is an expensive thing to operate, this whole long length of training. And a number of people wash out, people that have passed selection. So there's always, course after course, there's always the pressure. You have to be your best every day, and show up ready and prepared, and keep your wits about you, and so you kind of get used to the pressure, course after course, and there's small unit tactics, and of course the survival and evasion skills and whatnot, those kinds of skill sets that they instill in you, and you have to do well. You have to pass every step of the way, long before we ever got to medical training.
And so you finally get your Green Beret, and they put the crossed arrows on you, which is the symbol of Special Forces. I mean, it's obviously probably one of the proudest days of your life.
Absolutely. That was a huge thing. And I mean, even though I was excited to get it, and I knew I had met the standards to obtain it. I think kind of just reminiscing, when I put it on my head for the first time, I was excited. I was glad that it was over, but I also didn't really feel adequate. That I felt like it was really just beginning.
Wow, interesting. I mean, when you say didn't feel adequate, do you mean that you hadn't accomplished anything yet, or what you did was basically the bare minimum, so to speak, or what?
Yeah, to an extent, because I hadn't been in combat yet.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is what, December 2008 or sometime early 2009 when you're all done?
Yes, December 2008. Yeah.
How quickly do you get to combat? How quickly do you deploy?
So I deployed 7 months later.
Okay.
Which was pretty quick, and because teams are deploying to all over the world at any given time. I mean, we're not just going to combat regions or known combat regions. I was kind of worried that I'd go to a team and end up, 3-4 years and not even go to Afghanistan or Iraq. And but I kind of lucked out. I went to a pretty badass team from the get-go, and that was kind of already a hardened, congealed group, and right off the bat, I mean, they were getting ready to deploy. So immediately when I got to the team, they were already in training, and so it was week in, week out. We were getting ready to go to war.
Okay, so where are you headed, and when do you get there?
So we got to Afghanistan in, I guess, beginning right around July 4th of 2009, and we were in the western part of the country, in Shendan, just a little south of Herat, where we were basing out of, and my team had been there the previous year and had seen a lot of combat and lost a team member, and there had been already quite a few losses. So it was a very interesting time in kind of the history of the war, and we still we're hoping that maybe we could actually win. I think we all felt that we were part of something that was big, and we were there to make a difference.
What was your mission while you were there? Obviously without compromising any security details, but what was your mission while you were there? In general, were you hunting after just specific bad guys, or were you just trying to clear an area? Give us some more information.
Yeah. So our mission was, of course, to go after bad guys and what we would call HVTs, high value targets, and but not only to go after those, and we did all over the country, actually, but also to train our counterparts, their special forces commandos, to train them in kind of all the aspects of our craft, so to speak, from intelligence gathering to medical proficiency, to actual war fighting, so that with the mission of leaving behind more capabilities than when we came, so that they can continue to have a somewhat of a stable government. At least that was the aim or the mission that we had.
Right. Now, how quickly do you see combat, or you see live actual fighting when you get there? What was the kind of operational tempo, and what was that like?
Yeah. So July, it was pretty quick. I don't know how many days when we got in country. It was on one hand though, probably. By the time I experienced my first combat and felt the first bullet whiz by, it came really hard and fast, and it didn't stop. It was pretty steady.
Now, when you think about that moment now, and you talked about getting your Green Beret, but you felt a little bit unfulfilled, did that moment sort of fulfill it for you?
Yes. I mean, I was there. I was doing what I signed up to do. And from that aspect, it did. And not only was I there doing what I had wanted to do and volunteered to do, but I also had people under me, and these commandos that I had formed a relationship with and spent time with, and so from that aspect, I think that was probably the most fulfilling at that point in the very beginning, was feeling kind of the weight of what we're doing and not wanting to miss that opportunity to make an impact.
Yeah, it just let me be frank here and blunt with this. You realize what you're saying, that watching bullets whiz by your head was fulfilling to you, which is in and of itself a little bit of a counterintuitive thought.
Yeah. I think you have to be a little bit crazy anyway.
There you go.
To want to do this. Yeah. It's in the DNA.
Okay, so are you taking casualties at this point? I mean, just what else is going on prior to what happened to you guys?
Yeah. So. We had been in kind of just a constant action tempo. Every couple days we were doing something, some kind of big operation, and of course there was the IED situation. We were doing a lot of ops where we may go in under cover of darkness and be there 24 hours and take large swaths of land, and then get in there, and then Marines would take our spot to hold that ground, so it had been pretty constant, I had we kind of saw it all, from individuals who were badly burned, and to being shot, etc.
When your training kicks in for the first time and all that hard work that you did for 2 years to get there, is there a sense of fulfillment in that?
Yes, I think that's the right word to say. At that time, when that happens, and to probably attest to this as well, it's the muscle memory you put in long before you ever there in that situation, and it kind of kicks in, and you do whatever you were doing back in the States, during training, and so yeah, it felt good. I think there's also the aspect of you're in such a small group of people that each other really well by this point, and you have the constant I might even say a fear of letting each other down.
Right.
It's you show up every day and you've got to give it your best, and so I think there was always that lingering fear of that green hat meant something because somebody paid a high price to create that reputation.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure I lived up to it, and maybe even hopefully continue the tradition.
Prior to your helicopter crash that you were in, did you have to work on one of your guys on your team? And the only reason I asked it is because you talk about that tight-knit bond that you guys have. Is it harder to work on somebody you know so personally?
Well, yeah. So kind of to back up, every casualty I'd seen at that point had either been other services, Marines, other Army, counterparts that we had worked with, other agencies, and so up to that helicopter crash, I had not had any of my own brothers that had been wounded. So the helicopter crash was the very first time that.
All right, well, let's talk about that night in October 2009. When you wake up that day, what's the mission? Do you know about it? I mean, what's going on? Walk me through the sequence of events.
Yeah, so we had been actually working on this for a while. That, to our knowledge, no one had ever, no other units had ever hit this area really close to Turkmenistan. Actually, just a few kilometers away from the border of Turkmenistan. And so it was kind of an area where drugs and IEDs, et cetera, munitions and weapons were coming across the border from other places. And so it was a bazaar of sorts. I think I want to say somewhere around 300 little shops that were selling and trading all of these weapons, and of course drugs are a main currency there. And so the DEA was working with us, and we went in to kind of put a stop to this big operation. And so we had known about it. We've been planning and preparing for it, and we usually rotated, as far as who was doing the planning and preparation and briefing everybody about the mission. And I don't remember who was doing it at that time, but I remember it had been for quite a few days. We knew that this was probably going to be a big one. And so we were actually supposed to go the night before, and we had some issues with our aircraft, and so we got pushed 24 hours. And so I'll never forget one of the guys that I had done a lot of medical training with. He was working with a aviation unit that was flying us, and I hadn't seen him for a while by this time, and so we got to talk for a couple hours. And great guy, great medic, and he was unfortunately one of those that died the next day, and had no idea that would be our last conversation. But so that was kind of the run up to this. We knew it was going to be a big thing, and the night we went in, we had more aircraft issues, and we were supposed to go in with 3 helicopters, and we had to push that down to 2. And so we weren't able to take as many as we wanted to. And so I think there was only, in the total number, I think there was only 5 from our team that went, with some Marines and then some Afghan.
So when the helicopter first takes off, or the 2 helicopters and the one that you're in, I mean, is everything routine? Is it normal to this point?
It was. I mean, as routine as war can be.
Right.
You kind of know the only thing that's not going to happen is the plan. So,
exactly.
So we knew it. We all knew it, and just when we got there, and when I say getting there, I mean we had a couple hour flight.
Oh, wow.
We were going a long way away, and so a couple hours flight in the mountains, and it's not just taking off in a nice 747. It was hovering. I think we were usually flying somewhere between 17 and 25 feet off the ground. Ridiculous, and then just hugging these mountains up and down these mountain ranges all the way there. And so I remember, hearing in my headphones that we were certain distance, certain amount of time away, and trying to move my legs again because they'd fallen asleep.
Wow.
And
was this at night or during the day?
At night.
Okay.
At night. I don't think we ever did anything during the day at that time. So it was, I would say, I'm just trying to remember, it was somewhere around the probably 11 o'clock time frame. And so I remember I had a little compass right there by my watch, and I remember looking down at my watch and making sure I knew exactly, which way was north, and remember, okay, I need to go to the left, and we were kind of going up in all kind of directions, and we had our layout of what the village would look like, but of course we'd never been there, and just when we got in, when we crested those mountains, they had a couple discus, which are anti-aircraft. They were expecting to get hit at some point, and so just on infill, we knew we were in a fight, and possibly the fight of our lives.
So, do you feel the helicopter get hit with anti-aircraft fire and everything else? I mean, what happens if the helicopter finally crashes?
So that actually happened when we were leaving.
Oh, okay.
So we actually got settled in once the initial contact was made. We went to our kind of our entry points there in the little village, and it probably took about 45 minutes for the moon dust to settle. It was extremely thick. In fact, we were having to clear rooms with maybe 1.5 foot visibility. It was horrible.
Oh, wow.
And just hoping that everybody was doing what they're supposed to do, and you didn't come across one of your own or an Afghan that you might have problems communicating with. I mean, a lot could have gone wrong in that scenario. But our aircraft actually left, and I think the closest people to us was probably a good hour and a half away at that point. So we got in, and actually it was a very successful night. I was on a position just south of this big bazaar, and there was after the initial contact, and clearing one shop after another, and it was millions and millions of dollars worth of drugs that were found, and I forget the exact count of IEDs that we found, and it was a huge cache that we got, and things were going well, and they started burning a lot of this. Obviously, we weren't going to take it all with us, so they started, detonating some of these IEDs, and the smoke started filling this valley. We're pretty high up, and the smoke started filling this valley, and I had about maybe 3 or 4 Afghans that were with me in this one position on this the top of this compound, and I probably had about 2 minutes. They counterattacked, and we probably had about 2 minutes where I knew something was happening. I couldn't see exactly, and we had infrared lights on our helmets there, and so in retrospect, I think they probably had some kind of night vision capability to kind of know where we were. But the counterattack got started with an RPG that knocked me down. Didn't hit me, obviously. Thank God I'm still here. But it's kind of how things got started that night. We were in quite a fight for a while, and I think with the aircraft was telling us there was about 400 Taliban that were kind of amassing on our position. So
oh wow,
we had to get out of there. Even in the middle of the fight, I mean, just to give you kind of a little, I guess, understanding of the scenario, they were dropping 40 Mike on sniper positions that had gotten set up, and we were under attack. We had to get out of there. So when our helicopters came in to get us, I mean, they were coming into a pretty hot place.
Mm-hmm.
but the moon dust again and the smoke that filled this valley was such that we couldn't even see our helicopters land. We just hear and feel the heat. And I'll never forget grabbing onto the person in front of me, and somebody was behind me, and we held on and we ran, and finally made it up the ramp and got in. And as the last guy was coming in, who happened to be our chief there on the team, with the thumbs up, we were already in the air. He was still on the ramp. We were trying to get out of there. So it was, we were kind of all shocked that we were getting out of there. I did not expect to live, survive even the fight that we'd been in that night. So we're pretty relieved, but also we knew we weren't out of there yet. And so the first helicopter had taken off ahead of us. And to kind of give your listeners a little understanding, these are the big helicopters, the mountain ones that have two rotors on them, CH-47s.
Yeah, the Chinooks.
And, yeah, Chinooks. So those things are huge. And we packed it in, and even running in the helicopter, it had already, people were getting seats along the sides of it, and I just ran up to the front and sat down on the ground there between the two minigunners, and we were probably somewhere. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. Time kind of slowed down where we got up probably about 700-800 feet, and we're trying to clear the mountains. And then in the process of evading fire and in the process of trying to clear the mountains, at the last second, the pilots realized they were flying us into the mountain.
Wow!
Just in the confusion of war, and so they pulled up, and as the helicopter came up almost full tilt, and we actually have video of it because of other aircraft that were filming as just a normal part of combat. It lost power, so we fell back down into the village. And I mean, those pilots were incredible, because those of us that lived, they saved us. Even though the helicopter fell back into this village on its side, at the last possible second, they got it straightened out, and we crashed through a 2-story compound that fell back on top of us, and it broke the helicopter in half. But the back end was pretty much everyone lived in the back. So I was there in front, and I remember feeling us falling, and I remember thinking, this is it, this is we're done. This is how I'm going out. And I remember that thought process. It seems like we fell forever, and somewhere in the line, because I had ran up to the front, just sat on the ground, I had nothing to grab onto when we tilted up and lost power. So I kind of went tumbling all over, kind of like a little ping pong ball, and so I lost consciousness. And I remember waking up and realizing that we were no longer falling, and then realizing that there was teeth in my mouth, and then realizing that I couldn't breathe. And by then the helicopter was on fire. So I remember trying to pull stuff off of me and realizing that it wasn't equipment. There was body parts. It was just a horrible scene that I've have dealt with since. And taking that first breath of air, spitting out my teeth, and I tried to stand up and fell like a sack of potatoes back to the ground. And I realized that I was broke. I was pretty broke up. And I remember, of course, seeing the kind of the chaos of the situation in the light of the fire, and there was distant screams of people to get out. If there's anyone left,
right,
get out. And so I started kind of crawling toward those voices, and in the process, and I'm somewhat leery to even talk about this from the standpoint of those that may be related to the deceased that would hear, but I think it's important to tell from the aspect of other service members who have experienced far worse than that, and have not perhaps dealt with those things adequately. I remember crawling past body parts and I remember one in particular that just the torso that I shook, and there was so much, people were just buried, and I remember shaking that body. Never saw who it was, but shaking that body, and then realizing that the heat was so intense, and they were yelling to get out, and I kept crawling, and I'll never probably completely forgive myself for you play the what ifs and the scenarios of, well, maybe if I had stayed there for a few more seconds, maybe I could have gotten them awake, or if tried to save them, and you think about all the training you went through to perform in these scenarios, and then perhaps letting your teammates down, or letting other service members down. It can be something that in the aftermath and the years to come in recovery, that can paralyze you, where you don't know if you'll ever be able to perform again because maybe you let them down, and so it's been and I'll talk about the aftermath, all that maybe in a second, but I remember crawling out and just at the trying to make it out the last few feet. My warrant, my chief Valdez, Jeremy Valdez, was the only other SF guy that survived. He put his neck on the line, and there was literally thousands, somewhere around 10,000 rounds from those miniguns that were cooking off, and just going everywhere. And he put his neck on the line and pulled me out the last few feet and got me safe. So that's how I made it out initially.
Okay. Just incredible. And there's so much there, but recognize, the one thing I'm thinking is when you finally get out of this helicopter, you're still in the bottom of an Afghan valley with people who want to kill you, right?
Right.
So how do you end up getting out of there?
Yeah. So we pretty much everything was destroyed. Most everything, my equipment was pretty much pulled from my body. My weapons were gone, just gone, and they had been pretty well secured to me. My body armor was still on, and I had a knife. That was all I had left. And my helmet was gone, and just likewise everyone else. I mean, I had one guy who had an M4 wrapped around his chest. Most of our weapons were gone, and so my chief took over, and we had a large number of casualties, obviously, and I think in thinking back, I think we only had about 5 or 6 who could actively even walk around.
Right.
So trying to kind of realizing, hey, we're in the middle of nowhere, and we really don't have anything to protect ourselves. We're thinking about all the avenues of approach and making sure that we had visual, and we finally made radio contact, and that the other helicopter that had gone on in front of us, Spectre gunship above had radioed them and told them that, hey, your guys just went down. And so they circled back and parked, basically in the desert, quite a distance away, and basically powered down. And we kind of relied on Spectre gunship. We had a couple A-10s that were there to kind of keep the enemy away for us long enough to try to get out of there.
Do you know the extent of your own personal injuries at this point?
At this point, no. I knew I was broke. I knew I couldn't walk. I did not really grasp how bad it was. And I think the adrenaline of it, at this point, I had 10 patients, and I was the only medic, and I didn't have an aid bag. And people were actively dying. So I had a guy with broken hips that was, starting to swell. I mean, he's obviously bleeding internally, and there was a lot of, and then there was quite a few Afghans that we had a language barrier at that point, and I didn't have an interpreter, and so trying to we got everyone kind of in this same little room, those that were too beat up to mount any kind of resistance. And I started crawling around person to person and assessing who was the worst off and kind of triaging. And I knew it was painful to crawl. I didn't really know why, and all that mattered really was that I was the only medic there, and they needed me. And so we stopped bleeding and tried to get a few guys splintered up, just sticks and rags basically.
Right.
And then at that point there was actually a Marine Special Operations, part of my MARSOC guy that I had known for a while, and they finally cleared their way back to us. And whenever he popped his head in, this little cubby hole, really all it was, and he with several expletives associated with it, he said that I didn't look too well, and somewhere along the line of I was an ugly mofo, and that's kind of how we kind of handed off. And I said, hey, this is the deal. This guy, this is what's happening. And kind of gave him a little sit rep of sorts, and told him who was the worst off and what I had done, guys that I'd given morphine to. And, because we had a little, every guy there had a medical pouch, and, in his cargo pants. And so, and I still had consciousness through this time, but it was starting to kind of fade once I knew that, hey, it wasn't all my responsibility now.
Right.
I think and then the movement to the helicopter that they had powered off because they didn't have enough gas to get us anywhere. We were so remote. They had powered off in the desert, and so we had to move somewhere around 700 or 800 meters over walls. So they ripped doors off to try to use as stretchers, and they would, like, for me, for example, you'd have two guys that lifted you up and over a wall and basically dropped you in somebody else's arms, and hopefully they would catch you.
There you go.
Yeah. So basically that was was a movement to get into the helicopter. And once that happened, I don't remember all that much until I woke up in the hospital.
When you wake up in the hospital, are you in a hospital in Afghanistan, or are you already in Germany?
I was in Herat when I woke up first.
Okay.
And they were kind of figuring out all that was wrong. And the next thing I remember was they had flown me to Bagram. I think that's right. The next thing I knew, I basically had already had a couple surgeries, and they were packaging me up to go to. I woke up when one of our commanders came in to give me a coin or a medal or something, and I think I might have nodded at him and went back to sleep.
So when you finally speak to a doctor, what are the extent of your injuries?
So I had multiple facial fractures, and had lost a portion of my maxilla, my top jaw, and had lost a number of teeth. Ended up being 6 teeth right there in front, the top that I lost, and as well as the jaw with it, and had a brain injury and had dislocated both my shoulders, had a broken back, had basically both my ankles I had severely torn, and then my left leg I had broken in a number of places, and had a couple of the tendons and ligaments I had completely severed.
How quickly do you get to Germany?
I think we're at somewhere around 24 hours, 36 hours.
Okay, so they didn't have to do like any emergency surgeries on you in Afghanistan?
Not necessarily, but I don't really remember.
True.
They'd already had, I think, two major surgeries by the time I really kind of became aware. And I think the first fully conscious time I had, we were somewhere a few hours away from touching down at Germany.
Who was there to explain to you what happened and fill in all the details that you didn't know?
Yeah. So there was, there was psychologists and psychiatrists, and then there were, of course, surgeons and oral surgeons and orthopedic surgeons, and I don't even remember. There was a bunch, and at the time, this is fall of 2009, and so I guess there was quite a bit of buzz. I think that was the first time that it even came out publicly that the Drug Enforcement Agency was even there in Afghanistan, and so there was quite a bit of buzz at that time, and so for whatever reason, and obviously I don't remember, but there was enough buzz that they completely cleared a wing of the hospital there, Landstuhl, and with security guards and everything for this wing. It was kind of surreal.
Wow.
While during our stay there, which was, I don't know, somewhere around a week and a half or something like that.
And then how quickly do you get back to the States?
I think it was right about 10 days or so after so it really wasn't that bad. I mean, some people stay quite a length of time there in Germany, but they got us back pretty quickly, I think, somewhere around 10 days. And that's when, I was, and they ended up getting me all the way to Bragg, where my family was.
Are you relieved that you're back in the States, or what's your feeling and your thoughts at this point?
I think relief is a good word. Yeah. I didn't know how many had died, and I didn't know who until probably about 5 days after, I think. It didn't register.
And what was that like when you find that stuff out?
Yeah, that was I don't really have the words to say. Of course, at this point we'd gotten kind of tight, and then there was also those that I didn't really know, the pilots and whatnot, and so I think it really took probably weeks for it really to dawn on me that they were gone. But I definitely remember being relieved that I'd made it. And it really wasn't until a couple months afterwards that all the other, issues and the trauma in my mind really started. And the guilt.
Yeah, let's stay there for a minute. So kind of, the physical wounds eventually start to heal, and you get cosmetically back to normal, but inside there's a whole different war that's waging.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's those invisible things. And I think, even though I think initially they told me it would take about 2 years to get me back, physically back together. And it ended up, of course, being a lot longer than that. And at first I was, extremely determined, to get back to my guys, to get back to my team. And I felt like, that's just what I had to do. I had to get back. I had to get better. And so, of course, eventually learning how to walk again and in physical therapy for months and months and months. And it occupied me. And really it wasn't until about 10 months afterwards. So we're now at this time we're talking about maybe 1st of September, mid-September, where the more psychological trauma started settling in. In the meantime, I had been I'd been married for 14 years at that time, and had gotten separated, and had a lot of changes in life. However, it really took about 10 months, even though the helicopter had been crashed for a long time. It took me about that long where I stopped falling, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So how do you work through all this? I mean, at what point in time do you get to a spot where you feel like, okay, I've got this under control?
Well, it took years, honestly. And it took some scary moments. It took, I'm very thankful that I had some people that kind of took me under their wing and checked on me, and it was kind of a different time as well, because our unit was moving to Florida. So there was a lot of moving pieces. The team came back, and I think might have been there for a few months, and they were getting ready for the next trip, so, and of course I couldn't make it on that trip. And so I was kind of out there and kind of alone, in this, newly single after all these years, and trying to still wrap my head around how I was going to be a good dad. And, of course, initially trying to fight back to get back to my team. And then it was one thing after another that kept happening. And so, and to kind of, for time's sake, to keep it in a concise package, there was a number of times that I called the crisis line. I think the first time I was on a highway, headed back from DC, and that's probably when the really visceral flashback started. Feeling the heat and feeling like that maybe I could have saved somebody but didn't, and I saved myself. And then the feelings of, it had been better that I came back in a body bag than to come back to divorce. And, all of these, better for my kids, and feeling that I really didn't have anything more to give or offer, or there was anything for me to do in life. And so, you know, the first time I called the helpline, crisis line, I was probably at one of the closest points I was to ending it. And I think it was at that point that I determined that one way or another, I had all these broken pieces, but that I had two kids that really needed me. Mm-hmm. And whatever I had to do, at this point, I may have let other people down, but I couldn't let them down. And that pushed me. And it was a very extensive journey. Still not actually probably quite over, but there were times where I felt better, and I was in counseling and felt better, and then you know, something would happen, and I OD'd on psych meds for a while. They had me on and of course they were just throwing Oxycontin at me. I think I had 3 or 4 different narcotics for a while going, and
wow,
and just kind of surviving. And I remember at one point I had we had been in I'd been in counseling and thought I was good. You know, I was kind of trying to move on, and they had by this time they had put me in a training billet, so I was training new medics, you know, and which was in and of itself I felt excited to do. And you know, I was giving back to the force, and I had something to give. You know, I had all these experiences, and but I had a road rage incident, and in the middle of the night in the highway, a guy just ticked me off, and you know, it was a trigger for me that I didn't even know existed. And I was determined I was going to kill him, and all this rage that I thought I had dealt with, and so and through all this, I've become such a big advocate for getting yourself right in the head. You know, as a veteran, there's so many guys out there and women who've gone through these horrific scenarios, and unfortunately, a lot of times we deal with it by getting back out there and never really processing some of these things and adequately dealing with them and as courageous as we can be to face you know enemy fire and bullets and explosions. You have to be courageous enough to deal with yourself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of veterans perhaps don't see it that way and think that they have to be tough. And really, I think I think the most courageous and tough people among us are those that decide they're going to deal with themselves. And if it takes 6 years of counseling, so be it. They're going to go through the process. And when it gets to that point, I think you're then ready to actually contribute something meaningful.
I mean, it's perfectly said. You know, the words are powerful, and we talk about it a lot on the podcast. You know, if you know anybody, or a veteran, or anybody who's in trouble or thinking about hurting themselves or somebody else, you know, don't hesitate, intervene, get involved, and take them to a professional and get them the help they need, because, you know, we're at 22 a day right now on average, and that's 22 too many. So, you know, it's a problem that we all have to combat and fix. Now, clearly you have moved past it. I would never say you're over it. I mean, obviously there are certain things that you're never going to let go, and it's just the nature of combat. Right. If you do it, there are certain things that you'll never let go of. But that all said, you got yourself back to a, you know, contributing member of society, so to speak, and, you know, you're working towards, you know, your medical degree, but you're also a Tillman scholar. You're one of several Tillman scholars we've had on the podcast. What was getting that phone call like?
Well, that was pretty surreal. pretty shocking, actually. It's a very long, arduous process, of interviews and essays and background checks, and so with every gate that I got past, it was, I told my wife, I can't believe it. They've put me on to the next round. And when I finally got that call, and it was pretty amazing. And I had been very familiar with Pat Tillman's story and the aftermath of it, and to think of Marie and the others that, his closest friends that created this foundation that's doing so many amazing things. I think knowing all that, I don't think I would have done what they've done. I think I would have been done with the military, with all the political shenanigans that took place after that, and so to be a part and given an opportunity to be a part of this community, this full of really stellar people, was rather shocking. And when we went to the summit just 3 or 4 months ago, and got to rub shoulders with some of the most amazing people that are doing incredible things, you have to pinch yourself and think, who messed up and let me in? There something that can't be right,
Right.
And so it was an immense honor, but we were chosen, and so we're moving forward, and hopefully going to be able to make an impact because of it.
Well, congratulations. Certainly is well deserved. Let me ask you about one more thing.
Yeah.
You had your accident in October of 2009. In 2010, you ran in the Marine Corps Marathon.
I did.
That is rather impressive, given the long list of injuries that you had and what you had to do with. What was that like for you, being able to do that on your own? And moreover, how therapeutic was it for you?
Wow. It was very therapeutic. I was trying to raise some money for families, et cetera. And, but really I think it was something that I was doing to try to prove to myself that I was still functional.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I paid a price for that. I even more severely hurt my leg I kind of permanently damaged it. So perhaps in hindsight, it wasn't the smartest thing I ever done. But hey, it gave me a goal, and I think that's huge. I mean, no matter where someone is in the process of recovery, you got to have a goal and a purpose, and just latch onto it and do your best to fulfill it.
And so you are on your way to getting that white coat. You've completed medical school, right? And where are you in this process, and what's left for you?
Yeah, so I have right at about 2 years left before I actually have an MD behind my name, and I'm in the then after that, of course, is residency, and it definitely is still a long road. I'm looking at doing general surgery and trauma critical care fellowship after that, and so I've got probably about 9 more years of surgical training left. So it's definitely a long road, but I'm extremely grateful that I have this opportunity. I have all my limbs, and some would say I'm not in my right mind, but I'm extremely grateful to have this opportunity, and really, I mean, I think anybody that's been through any kind of traumatic situation and survived, I think it is a gift if you can see it as such. a gift, a reset button that many people don't get to create kind of a new life. And that's what I've been afforded, an opportunity to do. And it energizes you to not lose a day, because you know how quick life is extinguished. And you kind of have to make the most of what you're given. And hopefully I can help a lot of traumatic patients in the future find that reset button.
Well, your story is just incredible, and the tale of survival, given the fact that you fell 800 feet out of the sky, and I know the pain of losing some of your brothers is still with you every day, and so I thank you for sharing all that with us. And it's a huge honor to be a Pat Tillman scholar, and I know you're representing them all well, but becoming a doctor and leading a life of service that way for the rest of your life also kind of is in line with everything that you've chosen to do from the time you rose your right hand and decided you were going to be a Green Beret in the Army. So, Karl Holt,
yes,
we thank you so much for everything. Continued success and get healthy and get well, man, so you can at least maybe walk a marathon somewhere down the road again. It's a little less damage to your body. But
yeah.
It's been an absolute honor, and thank you for your service to our country and so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, brother. Really appreciate that.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.